Hi, I'm Abby Bennett, and today I'm going to be discussing the health and welfare of Chicano migrant workers, otherwise known as braceros in the United States Bracero program. So first, I'm going to be discussing the living conditions of braceros. Workers often had to live in tents or small huts that didn't have indoor plumbing. As you can see to the picture on the right, they were often in extremely close quarters, allowing disease to spread very quickly. And again, they just had no privacy or personal space, which can again take a toll on their mental health. They were also transported extremely inhumanely. They often had to stand up for hours at a time while they were transported to different working locations, and they even had to sleep standing up. In addition, they lacked educational opportunities for their children and faced extreme discrimination, which I will discuss in the next slide. So the children of migrants often had access to free education, but they often had to go to many schools as their parents moved around a lot to find work. An example of this is Cesar Chavez, who was born in Arizona in 1927 and ended up attending 37 schools as a child. He often faced discrimination and punishment at school for speaking Spanish, and eventually he had to drop out in the 8th grade to support his family. An example from Ino Se Lo Trago La Tierra of this discrimination faced by a little boy says, siempre es lo mismo. Lo llevan a uno con la enfermera y lo primero que hace es buscarle los piojos. So they checked this little boy for lice, but did not check any of the other kids. And the nurse even made him take off all of his clothes, which is not a common practice in public schools and was just extremely discriminatory and harmful to the little boy. Again, these children were also called racial slurs and just really misunderstood by the white people who surrounded them. So the working conditions of the braceros were, again, very poor. Workers were often not given adequate water for the scorching temperatures in southern states, and many times the temperature reached above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Workers often had to resort to extreme measures. In Y no se lo traigo la tierra, it says, hacía tanto calor que no les daba abasto el viejo con el bote del agua. Venía solamente 2 veces para el mediodía y a veces no se aguantaban. Por eso empezaron a ir a tomar agua a un tanque que estaba en la orilla de los sucros. So because they were not given enough water by the farmer in charge of them, the workers and their children had to resort to drinking out of a water trough for an animal. Because they were not given adequate water, workers often suffered from sunstrokes. And in Y no se lo trago la tierra, the dad of one of the children suffered from a sunstroke. And the passage says, luego pensaba en que si su padre se iba a morir de la asoleada, oía a su papá que a veces empezaba a rezar y a pedir ayuda a Dios. So sunstroke was an extremely deadly illness, and it could cause death, and many, many workers suffer from this. This is a picture of a short-handled hoe that workers often had to use, and it was used to weed fields, and it required them to stoop down for hours at a time. Workers were not given many breaks, and this harsh labor definitely took a large physical toll on the braceros. And again, today, this is a symbol of exploitative working conditions. Braceros did not receive sufficient financial compensation for the work that they were required to do. One study on braceros in Cucamonga, California, found that the median annual income of the Mexican family was not more than $790. And it's estimated that an average family of 5 persons required an annual income of about $1,300 to buy decent food and housing. So workers were not given enough money to buy food and support their families. And in California, a study found that the maximum hourly wage during the 1950s did not exceed 80 cents an hour. So workers often had families that they were trying to support either back in Mexico or in the United States. And oftentimes they were not able to buy adequate food for their families or for themselves. And after World War II, the cost of living went up a lot, but wages remained the same. So it was even more difficult for braceros to provide for their families. And one of the reasons it was so difficult for braceros to earn money was because they worked at a piece rate instead of an hourly rate. So they earned money for the amount of crop they harvested instead of how many hours they spent harvesting it. So at the beginning of a season, when they were not used to harvesting this new fruit, they would earn less money than at the end of the season. So they were not given an hourly wage, which made it even more difficult for them to earn sufficient money. Braceros also had to pay a lot of money to make the trip into the United States, and they often had to borrow money from lenders at an extremely high rate of interest. So they had to borrow this money and then pay back even more money than they borrowed. Some workers attempted to organize themselves into unions, but were violently suppressed and in many cases are not successful. And many braceros just accepted the low wages because it was still in theory more money than they could earn in Mexico. But again, after they had to pay interest rates and for food, they were not earning much more money than they would in Mexico. So there are several ways that I believe will be efficient in improving conditions for the braceros. And one of these is to increase the number of inspectors to ensure that farmers are actually following the rules of the bracero program, including ensuring humane living conditions, ensuring that braceros are being fed and given adequate water. So having an increased number of inspectors will force farmers to actually adhere to these standards. Another suggestion is to raise the required wage from 30 cents an hour to 60 cents an hour to compensate for the increased cost of living that has occurred after World War II. And my last recommendation is to investigate whether or not 10% of bracero wages are actually being put into savings accounts in Mexico, because there is a lot of controversy surrounding this, and many people believe that this money is not actually being put into savings accounts in Mexico, meaning that the braceros are earning even less money. And then here are some of my sources. Thank you so much and have a great day.